Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Deku Was Trained by Saitama. An alternate universe where Izuku isn't trained by the one with one for all, but an old bald man who only needed one punch for all the enemies he had ever encountered. Know this, the strongest hero isn't necessarily the strongest man. The farther you get from the people you want to save, the harder it is to save their spirits. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description down below. If you guys enjoyed this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. All for One had eyes everywhere. He had eyes on his disciples' schemes, as well as any obstacles he would have to face in the future, including the boy, even if he had no eyes on his face. All for One had initially dismissed the boy years ago and couldn't fathom him entering the hero industry, yet such a crossing was inevitable ever since that boy had met him. The boy, whose name was Izuku, could be read as Deku, meaning wooden puppet. It was a name for someone who can't do anything, yet after meeting him the boy broke free from his strings. The man that he had come to know as the Sun, a being not equal to anything on earth. He was the ultimate reason why All for One was forced to be nothing more than the King of Night who had to hide in the shadows. More so than any hero, including All Might, who was nothing more than the King of Day who paraded himself around in public. All for One feared the sun. It is the presence of the sun that day and night exists. It is the presence of the sun that life persists. It was because of the sun, All for One was ever cautious and watchful. It was not simple paranoia. Ancient tales from before the age of quirks told of beings that did not come from the earth, but the heavens. These tales were mostly abandoned once humanity discovered space and found that the heavens were still bound by the earth's gravity. Was there any truth in these tales of these otherworldly creatures? Such were questions a young All for One never thought he would have to ponder one day. He had lived for many generations and witnessed many things. He had witnessed Smile Man give way to Ms. Joke, Human Rider to Ingenium, and the remnants of creation's Dr. Genus give way to the plethora of animal-formed quirks that exist today. If All for One was like any other mortal with a short life, he may have passed whatever he had witnessed as a series of hallucinations or hoaxes, yet it happened time and time again without fail. All for One had seen it, the moment this world would have ended with certainty, yet the world did not end. It happened again and again, always ending in the same way, by the hand of a bald figure. That figure would make his way toward the world-ending monolith. That thing obscured by the clouds and in a single punch opens a seam in the world that defied all logic. A seam between heaven and earth. A rift in space that connected the two realms, splitting the horizon cleanly twain. The world seemed to have reached the end of its time and time again, as if it was a matter of course. But that bald figure would always appear to avert it. Either rising from the ground or coming from the sky, in the end the difference did not matter. If there was truth in the old myths of these heavenly beings and demons, it reared its head whenever the Cape Baldy appeared. Why did holy men from east and west with differing beliefs shave their heads? All for One had for the longest time accepted that bald figure as a natural fixture to this world, just like the sun. He had accepted that such a being would never bother with the petty squabbles of mortals unless the world itself was at stake. That was why he was taken aback when the boy was chosen. The sun had shone on him. That boy that should have been quirkless, bound to a life of insignificance, had broken free from the fate that bound him and became the moon. Though the training he had undergone seemed pedestrian to the average hero, it was beyond what a scrawny 12-year-old boy should have been able to accomplish. Training without rest for months on end should have crippled him according to reality, yet reality was denied. After all, the training itself was the least of the dangers the boy had faced. There was even a certain incident when the master and disciple ran into the Yakuza. The bald figure never really had a way with words, so an escalation was inevitable. The responsibility of resolving that incident was passed on to the boy, and the boy responded to that faith. Cuts, bruises, and blood were the things accumulated on the tired boy's body. Even so, he never stopped swinging. His fists made a nasty crunch when they made contact. But it was fortunate that those noises were not the sound of his fists breaking. Crack. How is he still standing? Pant pant. The boy had one foot in the grave. Yet the bald figure simply watched on, convinced of the ultimate outcome. Even All for One thought it was callous, yet that boy never really had the common sense of humans in the first place. As someone who was always pitted for being weak, The small freckled boy could only smile knowing that someone had faith that he would succeed. Punch! Dead on his feet, the last swing. It has to be. Punch! It was never the last swing. All for One learned that much. The boy won't stop on his own. Every time he staggered, he would break into a smile and regain his vigor. For the boy, the enemy before him had always been his own limitations. Plus ultra. Ga. Taking down foe by foe, blow by blow, going beyond himself, surpassing who he was yesterday. The boy was intoxicated with victory. Nice fight, was what the bald figure said to the unconscious boy who was still standing. Wait, I got the directions wrong. Though unknown to many underlings, the bald figure was known to anyone who held power within the shadows. It was the unsaid rule within the underworld to ignore any incidents involving the bald figure decked in yellow. Such was the saving grace for the boy. The moon, the mirror of the sun, harbored the ideals of day, its moonlight cutting through the darkness of night, and that was what the king of night feared the most. The boy who admired All Might would surely become a greater obstacle than All Might himself if things continued on their course, for the boy now possessed strength like a god's. The only thing of comfort was the fact that the moon was not yet full. His head still had hair. For anything to be gained, something of equal value must be lost. The cost for a god's strength cannot be simply hair loss. That was what All for One believed. The scales would be broken if that was the case. That was the rule that applied to even the strongest of quirks in this world, all for one and one for all. For someone to gain strength, someone else must lose it. That was the case of everyone that bore one for all. That was the case for every victim of All for One. Even the moon has places in which the sun never shines. To match a fledgling demigod, he needed a demon. The world has always worked on the concept of plus minus zero. The world could not tolerate to leave balance breakers unbalanced. Through efforts that defied all logic, an unconscious mysterious being is summoned in a mass of black mud, taken from a realm that did not exist through the use of the quirk transmission. It seemed that the laws of conservation could not be denied. The world would always converge to a balance, and that was why he was hopeful. But he was promptly disappointed. He had prepared a list of names like Jack, or Mikumo, but when he gazed upon his demon, which was hard without actual eyes thanks to All Might, but under closer inspection, none of those names would fit. Muzutsuko. That was the name originally written on the notebook she carried. A pure child. Mizatsu meaning pure. It consisted of Mu meaning nothing and Zatsu meaning miscellaneous. A name befitting for a thing he pulled out of the proverbial ether. All for One could see that someone had scratched out the name. Nothing was scratched out. Without it, Muzutsuko could be read as Zako, the derogatory term for small fry. A derogatory nickname was the other common trait between the two who shared the same face. While the boy had grasped infinity, this thing in front of him was the embodiment of nothing. It was pure in the sense it had no quirk. An absolute weakling that lacked the power of that boy. Truly a useless thing at first glance. For that reason, All for One was disappointed. It seemed that the world did not actually care for balance. All for One may have regretted his lapse of judgment, but lots of things in his life could be considered lapses of judgment. Why did he give his little brother a stockpiling quirk again? Even so, the dark side of the moon could still fuel his successor's growth. Unfortunately, All for One didn't comprehend the true nature of the demon he had summoned at that time. The attack on USJ, unforeseen simulation joint, his successor had planned on was allowed by him, even if the plan itself had a 100% chance of failing if the information surrounding Sir Nightie's quirk was accurate. All Might's former sidekick with allegedly perfect foresight had already foreseen All Might's death. Now what would that man say? So I'll die someday? Everyone dies someday, but that day isn't today, is it? What's there to worry about something years down the line? Laughs if what you saw was true. Until that day, nothing in this world can kill me, is what All for One imagines All Might would say with a smile. Whether All Might's life could be taken then and there at the time, the attack served as a useful experiment to validate the strength of the moon without the presence of the sun. All for One needed confirmation of the boy's strength in comparison to All Might's. Even though the boy's strength was true and pure, it was precisely because of its purity that he attracted the envious gazes of his peers. The day of the sports festival arrived. It was an opportunity for students to prove themselves to potential recruiters. Internships were on the line and thus their futures. The event began with an obstacle race, but plots were already floating about before then. With a light tap on the shoulder, Izuku was already floating away at the instant's present mic announced start. Regardless of the good feelings people may have harbored for him as the strongest is a position of solitude. Everyone wanted to show what they could do, but they all harbored the fear of being outshone, so it was only natural for them to prey on the strongest. Only the weak are cruel, and mercy is the privilege of the strong. Izuku was floating away, and there was only one possible culprit in this situation: Urikara with her zero-gravity quirk. I'm done already? Before Izuku could mull on the recent events, he could already see Bakugo in the distance chasing down Urikara without any regard for first place. Round face. The audience doesn't take it kindly when a boy picks on a girl, thus they were actively booing him. But Bakugo Katsuki never cared for the opinions of minor side characters too unimportant to be named. He had to prove himself to the best, and to do that, had to beat the best on his own. He had to win by his own power. In the sports festival, all for one could see it, how isolated the freckled-faced boy truly was. In the obstacle race, everyone that knew of his strength attempted to hinder him. The child of gravity had tried to remove him at the first opportunity, but her plans were foiled by the prideful, explosive child. Children are both innocent and cruel. They know very little of the world, but it is precisely because of that narrow view they are the cruelest of this world. Sticky balls, walls of ice, robots, cannons, electrical discharges, disruptive sound waves, various animals, vines, turbo kicks, mines, both the obstacle course and the children around him tried to take him down at every opportunity, yet that boy lived in a completely separate world. Without paying attention to such things, he charged toward the finish line, taking first place. In the cavalry battle, the boy was the strongest horse, yet that alone could not bring victory. Chains are only as strong as the weakest link. A single indestructible link does not guarantee a strong chain. Todoroki had made an oath to never use his flames inherited from his father, but he broke that oath that day when he was faced that monster. Flicking away his ice like it was nothing, the shockwaves nearly blowing him out of the ring, but that fact never crossed that monster's mind. In the face of the overwhelming difference between them, Todoroki only felt one thing: despair. He could never imagine himself wielding strength like that. With that monster in the way, he could never hope to be the number one hero. In the face of that despair, he forgot about his father, and at the same time, became just like him. Yet even with the flames, they were put out just as easily as his ice. Even going at full power, his opponent did not bare his fangs even once. Are you done yet? With this fight? The son of the number 2 hero was never a challenge. It wasn't even a battle, yet Bakugo had won against that monster. By accepting his limits and planning around them, Bakugo had won. Even though Todoroki used all his power, he could not say he used all his effort. Being the number 1 hero with ice alone, with only half his power, he realized how arrogant and entitled he was. Seeing Bakugo and his defiant form, he realized the type of person he was. He had spat on the dreams of his peers, dismissing them as lesser beings who weren't even half as good as he was, while spouting off his daddy issues. Despite his crudeness, Bakugo was someone who would respect his opponents enough to give his all like he did in that match with Uraraka. Todoroki's saving grace, his cool demeanor was a shallow thing. In that sense, he was arrogant trash, even worse than his own father. On that day of the sports festival, Todoroki had lost completely, to Izuku, to Bakugo, and even to his own father. In the 1vs1 matches, the freckled boy was undefeated, passing over his opponents with a single flick. Mental attacks or elemental attacks, such attacks never landed. All for One was quite disappointed at the new stock of eggs. The brainwasher and the composite were hypocrites of the highest caliber. Relying on nothing but the gifts they claimed to despise, they thought they could defeat the moon who began with nothing. Such engagements could not be called fights, but it changed in the final match. The petulant Grenade had always acknowledged the boy for the longest time, even if he didn't want to admit it, for that was the source of his petulance. Taking into account every factor, the incomplete moon was conquered under the constraints of rules. That outcome was not outside the realm of possibility, especially for someone who actively sought to be burnt by the sun. The mirrored rays of the moon did not have the same intensity after all. The freckled boy stood alone, isolated by his peers, and it was then All for One played around the idea of getting the boy to join him. But that was just wishful thinking. All for One knew the boy would never stray from the path he had set before himself. It was a path that should not have been open for him, yet he denied that reality with nothing but his will. His limitations became nothing. As he demonstrated in that obstacle race, the boy already lived in a different world, Nothing in this realm would stop him from running towards his dream. To become a super cool hero that saves everyone with a smile. The boy was a machine. He lived only for his convictions and nothing would deter him from them. In that way, he was the same as All Might. All for One still remembers that figure charging at him with guts spilling out. Even though his body was something of a cosmic horror, he feared such machines originally assembled without a quirk to be found. Humans are strong because they can change themselves and rely on others, but that is what Katsuki denies and Deku embraces. Bakugo, first named Katsuki, had to win by oneself. Everything he achieves, he attributes to himself. He would prove the power of one overall. Midoriya, nicknamed Deku, was one who couldn't achieve anything on his own. Anything he achieves, he attributes to others. He would prove the power of all over one. Handing off your goal to someone else? I have standards, were Bakugo's words to Endeavor. Every child who wanted to be a hero has an ideal hero in their head. Bakugo was no exception, and it was this ideal image of All Might that drove him to be number one. For all that he was far from his ideal. In fact, there were others closer to that ideal than he, and that is where his hostility stems. For that reason alone, he had to be number one, to overtake that ideal image, to turn that image into his own. Even before the boy in front of him became strong, he would lend out a hand regardless of his own weakness. The river he fell into as a child was shallow, but the grudge towards that extended hand ran deep. You looked like you wanted help. Giving everything when he had nothing. Trying to help others when he had no power. Trying to help others even when he was scared, and as that boy grew up, that did not change even as he was beaten and ostracized. The more he pushed him away, the harder he would cling on to him, and what unsettled Bakugo was that he could never read him. Maybe his altruism was genuine. Maybe someone can be strong even if they are weak. If he was in that boy's situation, would he have displayed that same type of strength? That question was always on the back of his mind, something he always wanted to deny. But he could not deny it when the source of those thoughts was standing before him in the ring. In a sense, fate had allowed him to prove himself to himself. He was completely outclassed in power. His doubts were becoming fear. But to overtake the ideal image of a hero and make that image into his own, he had to move forward. Stunned Renaud, the bright light blinds him. Izuku can't see. Crack, 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 the erratic cracking noises, varying in size and pitch, make it difficult to judge distance. In that way, Bakugo had sealed off Izuku's senses. I can't breathe? The oxygen in the area was consumed by a constant stream of combustion reactions. The smoke was clogging his lungs. All aerobic organisms require oxygen regardless of size or strength to fuel the reactions that require them to move. The fighters were no exception. It was only logical that the fighter that used more physically oriented fighter would have higher oxygen requirements to act. Working up oneself was not the only way to sweat. Sweat is released to cool the body down. The body would sweat as long as the surface was hot, and in the case of Bakugo's sweat, it could generate heat via a reaction. With that loop of logic, he could sweat indefinitely until his body dried up or die of heat exhaustion. Izuku could jump above the smoke, but in the air Bakugo had the advantage of mobility. If he stayed still too long, the smoke would suffocate him, probably. Blow away the smoke in a single strike, that was the option he chose. Serious slap. A great gale is generated, and to the dismay of the audience, the smoke and dust had become their problem. Yet as the smoke cleared, one of the fighters could not be seen. Izuku searched the arena and the sky, but Bakugo was nowhere in sight. Was he blown out of the ring? To get rid of the oxygen in the ring was a double-edged plan, but though reckless, Bakugo wasn't stupid. With above-average spatial awareness, he was able to get behind his opponent, while cloaked in smoke. His nitroglycerin sweat-soaked uniform had served as a makeshift plastic explosive which he used to dig a trench behind his opponent. With the smoke gone and the oxygen in the air restored, Bakugo resumed his assault from behind, and his assault on the minds of all the young girls in the audience. The fated battle between men, Yurikara couldn't help but repeat those words in her head. Despite his strength, speed and durability, his mass was the same as anyone else's size. With an explosion aimed at his feet, Izuku was sent flying. "You are the strongest and that's why I'll win," was Bakugo's interpretation of Saitama-sensei's advice. Someone with unlimited power who could end fights in a single move wouldn't know how to fight and how to win. Izuku himself may not have limits, but the rules of the tournament do. The losing condition isn't dying, and neither is the winning condition killing your opponent. Whoever is still standing in the ring would be the winner. Izuku may have been invincible, but the ring under him was not. Even if the gap in power between them was infinite, Bakugo undoubtedly had more years of experience with the limited power at his disposal. Trying to recover, Izuku stomps hard on the ground before he is flung out of the ring. While in the air, Izuku noticed one thing. He ditched his shoes. That means, inspired by the mines in the earlier part of the festival, Bakugo had covered his side of the ring with nitroglycerin produced by the sweaty soles of his feet. Whether Bakugo knew it or not, his clashes with Saitama-sensei during lunch break had yielded results. Sweaty palms and sweaty feet are like the same thing, right? Were the words Saitama-sensei had once said without thinking. In another universe, many would question why Izuku took so long to notice the power of kicks, yet many failed to realize the same could be said of Bakugo with his sweaty feet. Izuku was in the air trying to make out what happened in the last few instants, and within this time frame of confusion was Bakugo's chance, the decisive moment. Howitzer impact. Propelling himself in a spin, Bakugo hits Izuku cleanly with his signature attack. The decisive moment would determine the final outcome of the sports festival. With his fist clenched, Izuku was conflicted on his next action. He did not want this rematch to be a repeat of last time, yet he still wanted to win. How did it come to this? Izuku was lost in thought and started reminiscing of today's events. A moment's hesitation decides the match. The lone figure stands in the ring victorious. The boy had fought against overwhelming odds and overturned his inevitable defeat. The victor with a grudge extends his hand out to the loser, a reversal of what happened about a decade ago when Bakugo fell into that shallow pond. A nostalgic scene it was. The hand that gives is above the hand that takes. "It's my win," was what Bakugo said from standing over loser. "Yes, and it's my loss," was what Izuku responded from below. The finalists stand on the podium, with All Might being responsible for handing out the medals. "Good job making good on your promise. Is there anyone you would want to thank?" "Myself." "That isn't how these speeches are supposed to go. What nonsense are you spouting? Victory is something you have to grasp yourself." "Midoriya, any words?" "I would like to thank Saitama-sensei. Without him, I probably wouldn't have even made it into this school." President Mike pinpoints Saitama in crowd, putting him into the center of attention. "Anything you have to say to that?" "I agree with the constipated kid." "What?" was the response of almost all the spectators, with some going as far as having a spit take. The mood was ruined in an instant. "I only gave you directions, you were the one who ran the distance with your own strength and made it this far," were the only words he had for his disciple. In the back of his mind, Bakugo was slightly irritated at the outcome, even as he donned the gold medal. He did not want such a victory. His opponent was the strongest, yet for him to still lose like this, that's not how the strongest are supposed to be. Win or lose, Bakugo always had something to complain about. Ida had chased after the hero killer in order to avenge his older brother, but he had failed. A Native American-themed hero lay wounded in front of him, yet his eyes were focused entirely on Stain. Even with that focus, he was lying flat on the floor waiting for impending death. He had failed as a hero and as a brother. Before Stain the hero killer had it, another kid had entered the scene. Someone with familiar green locks and freckled face was already giving first aid to the hero he was trying to kill. The stranger didn't pay any heed to him. "Who are you?" "I'm a hero as a hobby." Hero and hobby are words that should never be used in the same sentence. That was what Ida believed. But after realizing his motivations for hunting down the hero killer, he couldn't help but see the beauty of those two words together. There is undeniable beauty in the fact that someone would go so far to save someone for what essentially amounted to no reason at all. That motivation junk really has nothing to do with anything, huh? Ida finally realized the meaning behind Saitama-sensei's words, and a smile naturally appeared on his face, replacing the heavy demeanor he had on a while ago. Ida could only lay his head low, basking in the ludicrous beauty in those ridiculous words. But when his senses had come, he had felt something off about the voice, and when he raised his head higher he knew why that was. The person who had come wasn't Midoriya, though there was a resemblance if you discounted her ridiculous maid outfit accented with red ribbons. If asked why she wore something like that, she would reveal the fact she was an elementary school dropout and never got a middle school uniform. If she wore a uniform, it would only be on the level of mere cosplay, and if she was going to cosplay, it had to be a maid uniform, since anything else was too flashy. She didn't have the confidence to cosplay as has her favorite fictitious jump character, Kamagawa Misogi. Even if she was weak, even if she was lazy, Even if she was clearly no good, even if she was just a small fry, a random addition to balance out the factions, she wanted to be number one, and to be number one, she didn't necessarily have to be a hero if popularity polls were anything to go by. An unsettling aura washed over the area, and it wasn't coming from Stain. It was coming from the oddly familiar girl who certainly didn't belong to this world. Is what I would like to say, but it's just me, Zako, looking to usurp the main character. Both speech and mannerisms did not fit the scene at all. Was it a result of excessive foolishness or excessive confidence? The thing in front of Stain right now must either be a clueless idiot or a monster. But from that unsettling feeling that she naturally emanated, he went with the latter. Die, monster, you don't belong in this world. Before anything happened, the figure in front of Ida was decapitated and a geyser of red was created. Ida's grasp of reality was slipping as he couldn't comprehend the violence that was happening around him. 2 corpses lay in front of him. The girl's interference barely bought a minute. The paralyzed who was leaning on the wall was dispatched in an instant by a flick of the blade. Now that stained blade was coming for him. The blade passes through his throat. Agony and despair were stained on Ida's face as the last embers of life trickled out of his body. He strayed from the path of a hero, seeking vengeance for his brother, and he was rewarded with nothing. Blood splattered the walls, and Stain quickly left the lifeless scene to hunt for more prey. It is not by my hand that I'm once again given flesh. I messed up. The one that should have died was standing over the scene completely unharmed. It was at that moment that the events were converging back to canon, Deku and Todoroki, as well as Bakugo entering the scene only to see the self-proclaimed Zako standing over 2 corpses, and one of them belonging to someone they knew. If Deku didn't take an internship under Endeavor with Todoroki, maybe things could have turned out differently. Rushing over to the fallen bodies, the 2 heroes in training sought out any signs of life, but they didn't find any. Panic was settling in as Todoroki looked over to the other hero in training. He found an unsettling calm. As he looked over to Bakugo, he was simply sizing up to the strange girl. What are you supposed to be? Despite being a novice, Deku retained his rationality and turned his attention over to the other living person on the scene who was inexplicably smiling at them. If you're wondering, it's not my fault. Such wasn't a normal response for a supposed bystander, and the resemblance to Deku was unsettling. The 2 lookalikes were staring at one another, never breaking their gazes. There was an unsettling coldness creeping up Todoroki's spine, different from the coldness he himself could generate. Bakugo looked displeased. Take off that stupid disguise. Putting her hands together and trying to act innocently, the girl answered. It's not alternate universe? No, clone, twin brother. No, I am your. That sounds more dramatic. Formulating a backstory not for plausibility, but for dramatic impact, even though she wasn't really clear on what dramatic impact was supposed to be. Staring at her doppelganger, she says something totally out of place, though in this world that names places after the planets in Star Wars, it wasn't too out there. I am your father. Deku was completely dumbfounded. Thinking back, his parents lived separately. In fact, he did not really have any memories of his father who he hasn't seen in a while. Whenever he tries to think hard on it about it, there is only nothing. Not even a face. That fact was somewhat unsettling, but the fact he accepted that fact all those years was more so. Why hadn't his father crossed his mind? He breathed fire apparently. The more he thought, the more he doubted he even had a father. It was as if his father was all fiction, but he had to have a father, right? This person in front of them, his twin sister, was proof, right? She lived overseas with their father, and she came here to visit was the explanation Deku was fabricating for himself. His mind was drifting away and he wasn't even sure what he was thinking anymore. Only after thinking about it for a few seconds more, he noticed something wrong. You mean sister, right? Was his response as he slammed the bottom of his fist upon his palm, nodding with apparent understanding after being satisfied with his reasoning. Day by day, Saitama Sensei's influence was showing. He was honestly wondering why he was taking the nonsense being spouted seriously. Did you just assume my gender? Before Bakugo had even realized anything, a screw was protruding from his chest and the girl was no longer in his view. If this were a game, it would be an attack without an attack animation. It was a broken glitch, not unlike Izuku's stats. Kaken? An attack that literally took no time at all. Deku failed to intercept it as he was trying to make sense of the surreal situation in front of him. With the fallen form of Bakugo on the floor, Izuku had entered a form of shock and forgotten all about his doppelganger. He was quickly trying to apply first aid to stop the bleeding, but Bakugo was showing no signs of recovering. It was a weird feeling, one of the cornerstones of his life simply being taken like that was quite a blow. Todoroki, on the other hand, was in a state of panic. In front of them was a monster, possibly even stronger than their own monster. Forgetting about collateral damage and constraint, Todoroki blasted the monster with all of his hellish flames in a vain attempt to ward it off. Instead of being completely unharmed like Izuku would have been, the girl was reduced to a charred carbonized form, yet that did not stop the monster from talking. If the devil exists in this world, then it must be standing in front of him. Already woken up over your daddy issues, Zuko? In that instant, a winged beast without a skull swooped in to grab the charred corpse. In that instant, the world had changed. The events that transpired were something like a nightmare, and in that moment, all the dreamers woke up. Ida had felt the sensation of death, yet here he was still breathing with no wounds. In fact, he felt better than before. His armored suit was pristine. All evidence of the cruel scene which was stained into his memories simply became nothing. Midoriya stood dumbfounded. Bakugo, Todoroki, Ida and even Mr. Native were all standing around with no wounds to speak of. Not even a scratch on their costumes. Ida no longer suffered from back problems, and his arm was completely fine as if nothing had happened to it. Everyone's grasp of reality was slipping and they all feared they were going mad. But they were not alone. For on this day, the whole world will be overcome with a madness. In the center of attention was the hero killer, Stain, facing down the number 2 hero Endeavor. The hero killer was caught in the open and could not properly use his blood-curdling quirk. He was at a complete disadvantage, surrounded on all sides. The numerous heroes had ganged up upon him, and he had sustained various wounds, like a punctured lung. Even so, the heroes kept their distance, and the hero killer's next words kept them there. The only one allowed to kill me is the true hero, All Might. Everyone was frozen, until in that moment, the onlookers could see something flying in the air, carrying something vaguely human-shaped. This parcel was delivered into the hands of a man covered in hands standing on a rooftop, which many recognized as the leader of the League of Villains. To the onlookers, he seemed like a hero swooping in to save his comrade in the last second. All of you don't see anything, do you? You all act like heroes even though you can't save one child. In Tamura's hands, which he thrust into the air for the world to see, was a burnt corpse with frail bones. Tamura was eyeing Endeavor with cameras rolling all around them, from the phones of bystanders to the one a news crew carried along in their helicopter. Everyone had their eyes fixed on the hero with the flaming beard. It didn't matter if this ordeal was orchestrated by villains, succumbing to base emotions. The people were turning against the heroes. Child killer! Endeavor tried to find the source of that voice in the crowd, but he couldn't. Endeavor was at the mercy of everyone's gazes and couldn't stop what Tamura was implying to the world. He tried throwing a fireball at the film crew as a warning, but the flying beast lacking a skull tanked the shot and fell from the sky. Endeavor never had the best reputation despite being the number 2 hero, but his approval ratings were simply being destroyed. Meeting the hero killer left Tamura with a sense of irritation. Going on and on about meaningless garbage like conviction, acting like that makes him superior. We just want to destroy the things we don't like. Anyone can say pretty words. Such a world this is, spout off powerful sounding words and you can justify anything. That was how shallow justice was. Tamura could play the hero killer's game. Thinking back to the old obscure biographies he had read on a notable hero hunter, he merely borrowed the words. Yet people rely on you, madmen. They have a mistaken assumption that of course you'll save them. No matter what happens, someone will do something. It's not their problem if someone's in trouble, and so in a small part of their heart it will have room to grow, evil shall be born. To anyone listening, even though they were scripted, they could only hear it as something genuine. In the back of Tamura's mind, he remembered Sensei's words to bring forth convincing emotion. No one came to save you. The poison flowed endlessly with what people assumed was genuine emotion. The poison was intoxicating, more so than what Stain had spewed. The unconscious Stain was unable to reject Tamura's poison. But this evil will never be judged. This is the difference between them and villains. The corpse in Tamura's hands dissipated into dust, and the gentle winds carried them away. The film crew was enamored with the scene that was straight out of a movie. People are stupid creatures and will gravitate to things they find flashy, no different than moths to a flame. That was how many heroes earned their place, and Tamura would simply use the same method. With his hands empty, his words only became stronger. Tamura had stolen everyone's gazes, and on his face, a smile blossomed. This phony peace has dyed the people evil. Bullying, discrimination, and war still exist. What this world needs is not biased justice, but unbiased absolute evil. We can unite the whole world as one with terror. Unbiased terror can create true peace. Do you have a sense of duty like ours? No hero came to save Tamura as a child, but a villain. Even as the world becomes dust, he would always have that memory. Heroes and villains were simply the two sides of the same coin. The difference between them is who wins and who loses in the end. If you keep winning, you are a hero. It's simply that. Those who lose are in the wrong and are considered villains. That is the way the world works. He was a loser, a minus. That's why he will break this world into dust. Not all kids are waiting for heroes. Some like me were waiting for a great villain to take the stage. That trash All Might was simply a tool of violence, a beat stick for the winners to hit losers with. For every plus, there must be a minus, for this world was plus minus zero-sum game. Thrusting his hand violently in front of his face with fingers outstretched, Tamura uttered something of a familiar phrase. Minus ultra. With those words, the whole world seemed to go mad. To the bystanders and all the people watching it live, as well as those who would come across recordings of this historical scene, they couldn't help but repeat those words. Across the country, it became a viral chant. Minus ultra! Minus ultra! Minus ultra! As Izuku thought back on the events of that day at Hosu, he couldn't help but feel inadequate. He wanted to deny it, but after witnessing scenes of death up close, he could no longer overlook the flaws that still dwelled within him. Those flaws were the facts his mind and heart were still fallible. Hesitation and panic had kept him away from his true potential. It should have dawned on him in the sports festival. No, it should have dawned on him in his first practical exercise against Kaken, or even the UA entrance exam. He was nothing more than a fidgeting force of nature. Emotions would dull his motions and he would devolve in an erratic mess. Overusing force or not using enough. He either hurt people excessively or he lost. In that sense, he never really felt like a winner even when he wins. He would have lost to Shinso's brainwashing quirk if not for his special mind-strengthening chant. No AC in summer and no heat in winter. No AC in summer and no heat in winter. In his shaken state, he delivered a punch whose shockwave knocked Shinso out cold and out of the ring. He had always been more of a fidgeting force of nature than a hero, unleashing his infinite strength with little awareness. In that final clash with Kaken, he could have delivered a final counter, but he withheld it. He didn't trust himself in his panic state. Kaken may have sensed it, but luckily he dismissed that idea and didn't throw a massive fit in front of national television, though that did not mean he didn't throw televised fits earlier in the sports festival. B-Class was terribly angry at them because of Kaken. Victory would be in his hands, yet he would let it slip. No matter how much he had progressed in terms of physical attributes, he was still a far cry from being a hero like Saitama or All Might. He did not possess the finesse. The striking image of Saitama-sensei's fist enters his vision. It was a nostalgic thing. It was an occasional treat whenever they were on their daily 10 kilometers run as a villain entered their view. Before he had bald spots, all he could think of it was a hand that possessed infinite power, yet as he lost his hair, he could tell it was something more. As Izuku ran his fingers through his still abundant head of hair, he knew he was far from Saitama's level despite the bald spots. Though infinitely fast, he still did not have speed that surpassed even precognition like his master before him. He was not a baldy yet. As he thought about it, the recent events at Hosu where Endeavor's reputation was struck a fatal blow, it would make his continued internship questionable. As he looked over to Kaken, he noticed he was in a mood worse than usual, and so he turned his attention to his other classmates. As he looked around the classroom, his classmates were discussing the events of their respective internships. "You saw Deku in a maid outfit," was Uraraka's exclamation of surprise as Ida was recounting his harrowing run in Wistain. "Seriously," was what Kirishima exclaimed as he was nudging Bakugo, who was trying his best to ignore him. Ever since Uraraka learned of his shared past with Kaken, she would ramble on and on about the fated battle between men, occasionally peeking at him with an unsettling stare he never really understood. Meeting one's doppelganger was never a good sign if Bulge of the Battle Star was anything to go by. When the two meet, one would die moments later. That was how those meetings usually went, and in his experience it held true, maybe? The whole ordeal was surreal. He couldn't help but think he should have felt something different from the incident. A corpse bearing his face, It should have unsettled him, but he possessed no sympathy. Todoroki was especially shaken after creating a burnt body, and as Izuku remembered that familiar hand-faced man's performance, he couldn't help think Endeavor's reputation was being attacked on purpose. Child killer. That was what the public accused Endeavor of being, despite the fact that there were no reported casualties at Hosu despite all the damage or staying running rampant. No one was injured, and that was an unsettling fact. That was the fact of the matter whenever the League of Villains was involved. For them, life was but a video game. They had targeted All Might, and now they were gunning for Endeavor, hoping to erode away the pillars of peace they represented. If you can't beat the final boss on the first go, grind up on the lower bosses, was what that hand-faced man would probably say if Izuku's intuition was correct. When he had personally faced them down, Aizawa had claimed that they were nothing but hired actors to play the part of villains. This was reinforced as Izuku did research on a man covered in hands. Initially, the public thought he was a petty criminal that did acts of petty vandalism, yet there would be no trace of evidence the next day. His targets always ended up pristine. Everyone remembers that day when the one who introduced himself as Shigaraki appeared on top of that statue of All Might in the center of the city. When he placed his hand on top of the statue's face, it started to disintegrate into dust. In the view of the large audience, he pulled off an elegant landing, or it would have been elegant if he wasn't wearing an outfit decorated in tacky hands. When the authorities tried to catch him, he disappeared with a puff of black mist, yet the outcome would always be the same. The statue that was certainly reduced to dust had returned like nothing happened. Some people in public went as far to call the man the handyman. He would appear one day to destroy various monuments right in front of people's eyes, yet they would be fixed the next day by some sort of miracle. People tried to figure out the identity of this handyman. Since a mask covered his face, many believed him to be Overhaul, the leader of the 8 precepts of death. He had the right quirk, yet people dismissed this theory as Yakuza weren't so keen on media exposure. There was no apparent goal, or any reason. He was a man-child who went about smashing things, but was responsible enough to put things back as they were. So harmless he appeared to be, the only heroes bothering to apprehend him were those after cheap media exposure. But that all changed in his assault against the students of UA. By word of mouth, the public knew that this childish, yet mysterious figure was the leader of the aptly named League of Villains. The faculty of UA dismissed the attack as a training exercise for students, and then the League of Villains cemented itself as a sort of theater troupe hired by heroes for publicity stunts. As physical evidence of their crimes never seemed to exist, the League of Villains had the gall to be a publicly traded company with merchandise. No one could ever prove that they ever did anything. Any video of them that exists never depicts them doing anything illegal. After all, none of their antics resulted in any casualties or permanent damage. It was all about the spectacle. Their stock market prices shooting up ever since that incident in Hosu. One of their apparent members, Twice, who has never been unmasked, has been reported to work as a fodder spawner for hero shows at amusement parks on multiple occasions. It can't be denied he has the perfect quirk for it, though it was strange he never worked as fodder himself. Despite the innocent facade, there was something more to love. Everything changed when that incident at Hosu occurred. There were many people that tried to contextualize the nature of the love. Did the League appear to denounce Stain or support him? The fact Love profited off Stain merchandise didn't help answer anything. Hero action figures need villain action figures after all. Was the League simply a group of stage hands, or was it actually a group of villains? Regardless of what the League of Villains was, everyone knew what it represented. The League of Villains was a symbol of change, and many were willing to ride its wave. People were slowly losing faith in heroes. Endeavor was not an exception. The world was changing quickly, and the pillars of peace were crumbling. All Might could feel it in his bones. There were a lot of absurd things in this world, a lot of things he came to accept. But in front of All Might was a man he couldn't comprehend. You may have absolute strength, but you don't have absolute power. You're not a baldy yet. By sheer coincidence, All Might had run into Saitama at a nightly supermarket sale, hoping to snatch up some half-priced bento as a midnight snack. As the night progressed, they found themselves facing off each other on a familiar beach. Sand and water were kicked up at regular intervals, regardless of how careful the two combatants were trying to be. It was apparent that tomorrow's forecasts would be rain mixed with some sand. His old teacher Gran Torino seemed to have a lot of respect for the Cape Baldy. At first, he attributed it to harmless ageism, but after exchanging a few hundred punches, All Might could feel it. Young Midoriya seemed to exude an infinite amount of strength from his small frame, but Saitama-sensei was something much more. All Might rushed forward, his two hands quickly becoming hundreds of fists but before they could make impact, 100 red-gloved hands materialized to catch them all. My turn. Consecutive normal punches. Fists emerged in front of All Might, and with two hands he could block two at once, but the third smashed into his unprotected stomach. There was no delay between the three punches. It wasn't simply a matter of speed, they were all launched at the same time, and the three fists simultaneously existed in that moment. Saitama was careful not to make a fourth. Saitama-sensei was certainly going easy on him just as Gran Torino had. There was no reason for him to stop his combo at 3 punches. If he so desired, he could have ended the fight with his first punch. That one thing alone was what All Might knew as truth. The fact his fist was in 3 places at once by some odd multi-dimensional refraction phenomenon in that moment was irrelevant. As Izuku was trying to clear his head of unsavory thoughts, he found himself at Dagoba Beach wishing to feel the calm sea breeze, but he managed to spy his 2 heroes in about. The 2 fighters continued their clash, the raging winds preventing anyone from getting too close. All Might's punches and kicks created audible snaps, but it was apparent that Saitama was on the defensive, or that was what it would have appeared to Izuku if he saw this battle years ago. Saitama was holding back, only using the rare half-baked counter. All Might's power had seemed bottomless when he was a child, but that changed when he himself had become strong. Even All Might had limits, but Saitama-sensei by contrast did not. Saitama-sensei's wasn't simply infinite, it was beyond that. That red-gloved fist wasn't merely a hand that possessed infinite power. That was what Izuku had come to know, a truth that would be cemented today. It was a hand that reshaped reality itself. It wasn't the punch itself that granted victory, rather, it was victory that caused Saitama's punch. It was a burning hand that grasped victory as it was clenched, before the fist was even thrown. Its silent roar guaranteed victory through a reversal of causality. Speed, power, time, place, intent and causality were irrelevant. Victory was a matter of course. It was a sure-win plot punch that could pierce any plot armor. He was a hero that always wins with no exception, the very embodiment of Kaken's ideal. Izuku still had a long way to go from reaching that ideal. He was not a Baldi yet. All Might braced himself for the unstoppable red fist, yet that fist thrown at warp speed was stopped at warp speed, but that did not stop the great gale which was the byproduct of that fist. The air was suffocating, and the clouds were parted. Such a feat was something All Might could accomplish easily in his prime if he was serious, and something he could still accomplish if he was willing to cough up some blood, but the man in front of him did not bare his fangs even once. On Saitama's face was the same unchanging distant expression throughout the entire fight. It was a face that seemed to suggest that the trip to the supermarket for half-price food a while back was more exciting. All Might was at his limit, and as his muscles relaxed, he assumed an emancipated form not unlike a skeleton. Izuku almost revealed his location with an audible gasp. "Are you alright?" All Might couldn't keep up his facade of health, and he regressed into his passive form with blood pooling in his mouth. His large muscular form, which was his public image at some point, had become little more than little smoke after a life-threatening injury, and All Might was forced to live a double life as an emancipated skeleton. Why? Why you didn't become a symbol of peace? That was the nicest All Might could phrase his question in his moment of weakness. In the pits of his heart, he was raging, wondering what such a hero was doing when All for One was prowling about for generations. Saitama was simply a hero who could never lose. Trying to support All Might by giving him someone to lean on, Saitama tried his best to answer in a civil manner. "I didn't become a hero to be praised. I wasn't all too popular as a pro." Emancipated and coughing up blood, All Might did not understand the old man in front of him, even if his explanation was not unlike Gran Torino's. "Besides, you're doing a fine job yourself as a symbol, right?" There were many like his sidekick Sir Night-Eye that urged him to retire when they saw that body of his. To find someone who didn't was refreshing. All Might could only give a hearty laugh with a smile on his face. Even with this weak, unreliable body? Even though All Might was far from his prime, Saitama still acknowledged him as a formidable hero. "You know, I knew someone who wanted to become a hero, someone who fought for world peace. It was a wish almost everyone at one point dreams of. But that person lowered the hurdle right before the goal, settled for being a monster, a symbol of terror. A symbol of terror, someone who enforced peace and order through force, not caring about how people lived. All Might knew of someone like that all too well. That was what All for One was. In the anarchy that followed after the pervasive introduction of quirks, he was the one who ended it through terror, subjugating the warlords and establishing a shadow dictatorship. At some point, All for One must have thought himself as a hero on some level, but as he lived through the generations, he had become a pure villain. All for One lost his chance to die a hero and was forced to face down his own brother, the first holder of One for All, the power that now courses through All Might's veins, even if that body was currently on the verge of death. That's why you should give yourself more credit. You realized your ideal without compromise no matter how hard it got. That body of yours is proof of that. You're living your dream. All Might understood that answer, but it wasn't an answer that satisfied All Might. The symbol of peace must be unwavering and unbeatable. It must never lose to evil. Saitama's answer did not change. Even if I'm unbeatable, that man who settled for being a monster didn't accept me as a hero back then. All I could do was beat him. If you were in my place back then, I know you could have saved his spirits. As the conversation went on, All Might remembered what his predecessor had taught him. A hero doesn't just save people's lives. A hero also saves people's spirits. Despair and danger go hand in hand. How could he have forgotten such a simple thing? For a second, he was ashamed for being praised so highly by someone clearly stronger. Sorry if I was rude, but I have to ask you, why? Why now of all times to appear? It was a question All Might already knew the answer to. It was a problem he had faced too. My hero hobby kinda got tedious. I kinda forgot why I wanted to be a hero in the first place. But then that kid showed up. Saitama could only be referring to one person. Young Midoriya? The proud look on Saitama's face was all Might needed for an answer. The world has always been absurd. If the heroes run away, who's left to help? He was weak and probably wouldn't have changed the outcome. But he came anyways to save him. His feet moving before he had a chance to think. The fire in young boy's eyes was not lost on Saitama, and it was then Saitama remembered. A crab man and a bald-chinned boy, that's how it started for him. Like looking into an old mirror. I was once a boy like that too, wasn't I? Thus a spark reignited the flame. The people whom he once saved were no longer just a faceless mass. All Might and Saitama were finishing up their midnight bento boxes on the beach. They were a responsible sort, so it was guaranteed that they would dispose of their garbage responsibly. If you're so concerned about that body of yours, why are you still working as a hero? Like you said, I'm living my dream. When I was a child, I never thought that this dream would come true. Izuku in the distance hidden from view was listening in on the entire conversation. In his state of near exhaustion and egged on by the emotions swirling inside of him, All Might said things he probably shouldn't if the media were listening in. But then, she appeared. She took me in under her wing, some random quirkless kid, and told me I could become a hero. So every day after that, I lived my dream and I just refused to wake up. Gazing down at his weak body, All Might wanted an answer from the world's strongest man. Do you think I should wake up? Just do what you want. You do what society asks of you to the letter. You go to school, you study hard and get into university. After which, you'll get a decent paying job and eventually retire in your old age, possibly in the company of any family you may have sired. Yet, that plan for many is both a dream and a delusion. Sometimes you just don't fit in, the friction between dream and reality driving you to despair. Even after spending the past 22 years of life preparing, you always botched that interview. You remember your childhood and realize how insignificant your life had been up to that point. You didn't have grand childhood adventures, and before you knew it, your childhood had passed you by without you accomplishing anything notable. You never see those people you hung out with kids. Those kids you went to school with had become strangers long ago. As an adult, you're on your own alone botching interview after interview. What was the point of your life? For many, it is then they sink into depression. But after being bombarded with life's absurdities, you could only laugh. A crab man and a bald-chinned boy. It was something right out of an anime. It was then you remembered you wanted to be a hero as a kid. Your life is yours. Just do what you want, though what you want will probably disappoint you when you get there. You became the hero of your dreams, but it left you empty. But there was a silver lining. Along the many detours, it was there you found things more important than what you wanted. The lives you saved and those smiling faces, those things couldn't have been a mistake, right? The recent exploits of the League of Villains did not go unnoticed. For the longest time, the general public viewed them as mere pranksters and in recent times a theater troupe, appearing out of nowhere and causing chaos. But in the aftermath of it all, there would be no causalities, or even damage. Everyone had a different interpretation of what the League of Villains was supposed to be, but it couldn't be denied that the League wished to change the present. Thus, all sorts of people, from all walks of life sought out to join the League of Villains, whether they are disgruntled law-abiding citizens, aspiring heroes, or even villains. They all flocked to be a part of the symbol of change. Nito Monoma, the blonde boy from Class 1B who would like to be one day known throughout the world as the Phantom Thief, was sitting in a bar, a supposed hideout of the League of Villains. It was a quaint little bar, with a waitress in a maid uniform in the corner sweeping away, but he quickly turned his gaze. The green beast, the strongest horse of the cavalry battle, he wanted to forget. As he eyed the bartender, Kurojairi, though his face was obscured by black mist, looking at the snazzy way he was dressed, he knew he had made the right decision. He aced the interview and now was meeting his coworkers whom he will have to work with in a 3-man cell. The League of Villains, the theater troupe hired by UA as stand-in villains for that training exercise for A class. Just because he was in B class did not mean he was second-rate, yet the school afforded the opportunity for A class. Though he did not want to get into trouble, as someone who would be called the Phantom Thief one day, he could not let such a class disparity slide. Minus Ultra was the motto the League of Villains used, cementing themselves as the fictional rivals to UA High, whose motto was Plus Ultra. It was exactly something a cheesy no-talent writer would do. By volunteering at the League of Villains, the theater troupe that was secretly partnered with UA High, some aspiring heroes wished to boost their CV. Monoma looked around at the other people who showed up. A man covered in a black bodysuit who was having a hard time containing his excitement, and a blonde high school girl with hair buns who always had an eerie smile that showed off her pronounced canine teeth. On second thought, maybe he had made the wrong decision. These three were brought together in the same room specifically for the quirks that were written down in a certain notebook. Monoma, aka Phantom Thief, could copy quirks with his copy. Jean, aka Twice, could copy people with his double. Himoko Toga could copy appearances with her transform. It was then the familiar handyman appeared, with a handheld in his hand. Tamura eyed the members of Ditto Trio and only had one thing to say, before he went back to punching buttons on his handheld. You three will be the Ditto Trio. Ditto Trio of the Vanguard Action Squad would be their designation. Isn't this the part we give self-introductions? The bartender with the obscured face who was trying to steer the conversation away from anything too personal, as it would be a problem if an aspiring hero, for example, found out he was working with a serial killer. Besides, they had all the data they needed on these three. Love accepts all. There is no discrimination here. Wait, you're from UA? Could you extend an invitation to Mr. First Place? In Tamura's hand was a photo of Bakugo. It's always about A class, isn't it? As Monoma was losing his patience. Why'd you want that, wimp? Was what Toga had interjected. In the corner of the bar was an incessant inaudible muttering, but the Ditto Trio dismissed it. Steering the conversation away from themselves and onto others was the best course of action. You just called me out here to tell me that? Monoma wasn't pleased. No, I have an initiation job for you three. Tamura pulled out another photo, this time depicting a delicate white-haired woman from a psychiatric ward whose appearance did not match her age. Tamura was too blunt and direct and seemed to irritate the aspiring hero a tad too much, so Kurojairi took over the debriefing. You're all aware of what the public thinks of Endeavor, correct? You're aware of the rumors regarding his less-than-ideal family life, correct? Ever since denouncing Endeavor became popular, there were tabloids everywhere, seeking to expose the sort of person he was. On your right is someone who can disguise herself as anyone. On your left is someone who can create decoy doubles. You have the ability to borrow those gifts. A disguise ability and a decoy ability. Such were fundamentals for any aspiring Phantom Thief. In that instant, Monoma was satisfied. Whoever put the team together put a lot of thought into it, or that's what he wanted to believe, and tried to dismiss the handheld in the troop leader's hands. His gaze returned to Kurojairi. A pretty woman abused by her husband, imprisoned in a castle. Isn't whisking her away a job most befitting you, Mr. Phantom Thief? Staring at that melancholic yet sultry face, something primal was burning within Monoma, a feeling he wanted to deny. Twice, on the other hand, perfectly knew what this feeling was and embraced it. Toga was sorely disappointed, but a job was a job. Society was getting harder to live in for people like her after all. Just do what you want. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.